Chapter 1: The Weight of Silence. Elena sat by the window, staring out at the quiet street below. It was raining again. The gentle sound of the raindrops tapping against the glass was oddly comforting, yet it couldn't shake the heaviness that had settled deep within her. It had been weeks since she last felt anything. It started with small things. A forgotten phone call here, an ignored text message there. Her friends had noticed her pulling away, but they never said anything. They just assumed she needed space, time to figure things out. But the silence inside Elena was louder than any words she could hear. It was like something was broken, but she couldn't figure out what. She sighed, pressing her forehead against the cold glass. The world outside looked so distant, almost like she wasn't really part of it anymore. Every day, it became harder to get out of bed, harder to convince herself to face another day. "I'm fine," she told herself, but the words felt hollow. At night, her mind would race, thoughts swirling around like a storm, each one darker than the last. She wanted to scream, but all that came out was silence. It was as if her feelings had been swallowed whole by some invisible force. One evening, as Elena sat in her usual spot by the window, something broke through her fog. A message popped up on her phone. It was from Sophie, one of her oldest friends. "Hey, we miss you. Let's meet up? Tomorrow at 5? Elena stared at the message, her fingers hovering over the screen. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to go back to the way things were. But something inside her hesitated. "I'll think about it," she typed back. As soon as she hit send, Elena felt the familiar wave of guilt wash over her. Sophie had always been there for her. She knew that Sophie would understand if she told her the truth. But how could she explain something she didn't even fully understand herself? Elena stood up, pacing the small room. She could feel the weight of something pulling her down, something she couldn't shake. It was as if all the meaning had drained out of her life, and now she was just going through the motions. Sighing, she collapsed onto her bed, staring at the ceiling. She felt herself slipping further and further into the quiet void, and for the first time she wondered if she could find her way back. Chapter 2: A Hollow Meeting. The next day, Elena found herself walking down the familiar path to the cafe where she and Sophie had always met. The sky was still gray, heavy with the promise of rain, but it had held off just long enough for her to get there. She hadn't planned on going. In fact, she had convinced herself that she wouldn't. But something, perhaps a whisper of hope, had pulled her out of her apartment that afternoon. As she approached the cafe, her heart started to race. She hadn't seen Sophie in weeks, and the thought of facing her now felt overwhelming. What if Sophie asked her how she was doing? What would she even say? The truth was too messy, too tangled in emotions she couldn't name. Sophie was already there, sitting at their usual table by the window, a warm smile spreading across her face when she spotted Elena. Elena tried to return the smile, but it felt forced, unnatural. "Elena, it's so good to see you." Sophie stood up, wrapping her arms around her friend in a tight hug. For a moment, Elena felt a sense of warmth, but it quickly faded, replaced by the same hollow feeling that had been her constant companion. Sitting across from each other, Sophie launched into her usual chatter about work, her new apartment, and a funny story about their mutual friend, Claire. Elena nodded, made polite noises of agreement, but her mind was elsewhere. She could feel herself sinking, even here, surrounded by familiarity. Eventually, Sophie stopped mid-sentence and looked at Elena, her expression softening. "Hey, are you okay? You've been so quiet lately. We've all been worried about you." Elena froze. There it was, the question she had been dreading. She could feel the walls closing in, her chest tightening. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words were caught in her throat. Instead, she gave the same answer she had been giving for weeks. "I'm fine," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Sophie frowned, her eyes searching Elena's face for some sign of what was really going on. "Elena, I know you. You're not fine. You don't have to go through this alone, you know? We're here for you. I'm here for you." Elena felt her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to believe Sophie, but how could she explain something that felt so intangible? How could she put into words the emptiness, the constant feeling of being disconnected from everything and everyone? "I don't even know what's wrong," Elena finally admitted, her voice shaky. "It's like everything feels heavy, like I'm stuck and I can't get out." Sophie reached across the table, taking Elena's hand in hers. "You don't have to figure it out right now," she said gently. "But you need to talk to someone. You can't keep all of this inside." Elena's eyes filled with tears, and she quickly blinked them away. She hadn't cried in so long, and the sudden emotion caught her off guard. "I don't know if talking will help," Elena said quietly. "It's a start," Sophie said, her grip on Elena's hand tightening for a moment before she let go. "We'll figure this out together, okay?" Elena nodded, but inside, she still felt lost. As she left the cafe, walking back into the gray, drizzly afternoon, she wondered if she would ever truly feel whole again. Chapter 3. A Crack in the Silence. Days passed after the meeting with Sophie, and although Elena had opened up slightly, she still carried the same weight, the same emptiness. But something had changed. The silence inside her didn't feel as suffocating as before. The conversation at the cafe had left a small crack in the wall she had built around herself, and now there was a sliver of light peeking through. One evening, while sitting by the window once again, Elena's phone buzzed. It was Sophie, sending a picture of their old group at a party from years ago. Everyone was smiling, laughing, with their arms wrapped around each other. Underneath, Sophie had written, "Miss this? Let's get everyone together again soon?" Elena stared at the photo for a long time. She barely recognized the girl in the picture, so full of life, joy radiating from her eyes. She felt so distant from that version of herself, as if she had drifted too far away to ever return. But as she sat there, staring at the faces of her friends, something stirred deep within her. It wasn't much, just a flicker of emotion, but it was enough to make her pick up her phone and reply, "Maybe soon. I miss it too." The next morning, Elena found herself outside a small park she used to visit. It was a place where she could think, where things had felt lighter once. She hadn't been here in months, but today she had felt an urge to come. The sun was low, casting a soft golden glow over the trees, and the air felt crisp, fresh. She walked slowly along the path, her hands in her pockets, breathing in the cool air. As she rounded a corner, she saw a bench near a quiet pond. She sat down, her eyes fixed on the ripples in the water, her mind unusually calm. For once, her thoughts weren't racing, and the quiet around her wasn't suffocating. Elena closed her eyes and let herself feel. She didn't try to push the emotions away or drown them out with distractions. She simply let them wash over her, like the gentle waves lapping at the shore. Memories of laughter with friends, quiet nights alone, the ache of loneliness, and the warmth of connection. They all swirled together inside her. For the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel the need to run from them. After sitting there for what seemed like hours, Elena felt something shift inside her. It wasn't a dramatic change, but more of a quiet understanding. A realization that the silence and the heaviness weren't permanent. She could begin to heal, even if it was slow. She pulled out her phone and, without thinking too much, sent Sophie a message. "I think I'm ready to talk. Maybe we can meet again next week?" Almost immediately, Sophie replied, "Absolutely, whenever you're ready." As she walked home, Elena felt lighter than she had in a long time. She knew she wasn't fixed. There was no quick solution to the void she had been feeling, but she had made a step forward. And that was enough for now. The rain began to fall gently as she neared her apartment, but Elena didn't mind. She tilted her face up to the sky, letting the raindrops touch her skin. The world around her felt real again, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel so alone. She wasn't sure what would come next, but she knew she didn't have to face it in silence. There were people who cared about her, people who would stand by her side, even when she couldn't make sense of her own feelings. And in that moment, with the rain falling softly around her, Elena allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she would be okay.